morning, everyone. I want to thank Laura for inviting me to be here, and what I'll talk about is mainly about sexual rights and gender issues in Brazil. But of course, what I'm talking about has to do with a movement that is larger than Brazil. I'm focusing on Brazil case, but of course, issues of sexual rights are in the agenda of many countries, and what I am mostly discussing here is the category of sexual harassment, which is also related to other types of violence, and I'm going to show. But my focus here is just what is being more public in Brazilian media on these discussions. But of course, there is a clash of meanings that I'll try to explore here. So, what I want to bring to you is what I call first #feminism and sexual violence in Brazil. This work reflects on internet and social network campaigns against sexual harassment and sexual violence from the moment they first appeared in alternative media and then reached mainstream news stories. In Brazil, such discussion on media has shown this struggle for recognition since 2013, and with data from alternative and hegemonic media, I'll be focusing on two campaigns. One is called No More Catcalling, Chega de Fio, for this in Portuguese, and the other one was called My First Harassment, Meu Primeiro Assédio. These two were two campaigns promoted from a non-governmental organization called Think Olga. And this paper discusses attempts made by feminist field to change what they call rape culture through images and narratives of the self, searching for voice and recognition. The hegemonic media, nevertheless, prefer to focus on crime, such as pedophilia, and dramatic stories that are bestsellers and therefore change some of the meanings in this field. I will read a little bit to make it, to be sure that I don't. It's working. So this text aims to understand how categories of sexual abuse are being constituted and discussed. I think the other one is. This article aims to understand how categories of sexual abuse are being constituted and discussed in the public arena, covering media productions, internet and social network content, and the way meanings are disputed, especially when they travel through different types of media and different types of social movements. To a certain extent, this process can be understood as demands for recognition and women's rights. But there are public struggles around meanings, for the expression sexual harassment is relatively recent in Brazil, and the acts can be qualified as a pass or mere catcalling. Therefore, such campaigns were also polemic in the country, in a country well known for supposedly sexual freedom, but also with the highest rates of violence against women. This work focuses on Brazilian non-profit organization Think Olga, which since 2013 has turned sexual harassment into a social issue. I analyze. Do you think it's okay? I analyzed two campaigns: No More Catcalling, Chega de Fio, and First Harassment, launched in 2015 on Twitter as a reaction to a TV show. Fieldwork here consists of Fieldwork here consists of an ethnography about forms of sexual violence and the young feminist movements in São Paulo since 2014, when I also interacted and took part as participant and observer in roundtables and events, and interacted politically in the field in order to discuss issues of harassment and sexual violence at the university where I work too. The analysis also relies on systematically collected data from mainstream and alternative media by a team of undergraduate students. all stories that could be found related to those campaigns in this period. Okay, so we have like 82 mainstream news stories and 500 tweets in just a few days to discuss. I describe here a process of demanding social recognition for relatively new notions of sexual harassment, and I want to see how much the alternative media can reach hegemonic commercial media and how meanings are translated. Definitions of violence vary enormously, culturally and historically, and even definitions of rape have a very controversial history. The classic work, A History of Rape from Pigarello, a French historian, explored the social construction of rape as a criminal category alongside changes in mentalities about sexual violence. It follows a long trajectory in category in the French legal system until when rape was a crime against family honor, until rape became a crime against the person. Okay? Pigarello explored the changes in the conceptions of rape, both in legal systems, but also in ordinary social use of the system. As you can also see in Brazil, rape was understood in other ways in previous decades, and the victims were usually considered accomplices or even co-responsible for rape. The crime of rape in Brazil was reviewed in 2009. As it was first defined in the Penal Code as crimes against custom, and it only related to vaginal intercourse. A new constitution in 1988, our democratic constitution, international conventions, feminist movements, and a case at the Inter-American Court of Human Rights have changed Brazilian laws related to gender violence. Comprehensive law on domestic violence, called Lei Maria da Penha, was promulgated in 2006, and it defined many types of violence: physical violence, psychological violence, sexual, patrimonial, and moral violence. It gave a larger definition of sexual violence as forcing someone to practice any sexual act, allowing rape to be mentioned even within marriage. After this law, rape was redefined in the Penal Code in 2009 in order to take into consideration any sexual act committed without consent, whose victim can be a woman or a man, thus including other types of sex. The chapter which this law applies is now crimes against sexual dignity, not against custom anymore. But nevertheless, it is not a crime against a person, as in the French law. And in 2018, there was also a new law on sexual importuning, which is another way of putting sexual harassment that took place. And one of my points is that this new law of 2018 was the result of the campaigns I'm going to discuss with you. Okay. So, although Think Olga and other feminist groups, Think Olga was not a feminist group in the beginning. It was just an NGO discussing issues of violence. But although they were fighting for cultural changes, a somewhat unexpected consequence of their campaigns was the production of an entirely new crime of sexual importuning. Such changes in names or in classificatory categories express changes in sensibilities, what we call juridical sensibilities sometimes, concerning notions of violence that are also at the root of processes leading to the formation of human rights. So my idea is that those sexual laws concerning sexual violence are part of human rights struggles, right? There has been a continuous circulation of the debate in the mediascape, what Apadurai called mediascape, from social network to mainstream media, specifically from 2013 on. I also want to stress that the displacement of the subject from alternative and feminist media, blogs and sites, through social media, finally arriving in Brazilian hegemonic media, also shows the transformation of medias and images. Sexual harassment refers to a plethora of attitudes and actions, and the meanings of such acts are not very clear for us. I also in the struggle. A new 21st century of young feminists, a new wave of young feminists, is at the origin of the campaigns. This feminism is based on the new media and the construction of new types of publicness. I have to remind that feminism was kind of visible in Brazil in the late 1970s. In the 1980s, it kind of disappeared from the public scene, although it was entering what we call the process of institutionalization of feminism. So there were, under Lula's rule, there were many official agencies, social policies, and committees dealing with domestic violence, women's health, and women's rights. There were national conferences on public policies with the participation of civil society and support of a special ministry for women's and human rights. Of course, this is being dismantled by the government now. Following Sonia Alvarez, I want to consider feminism as a discursive field of action that is built around many lines of political communicative webs, guiding strategies and identities. With the polarization of new media, because until the year of 2000, in Brazil we had only 7 families controlling the major media companies. But we still have those 7 families controlling 7 large media groups. But from 2000 on, we have the spread of internet. And from 2010, this became larger. So nowadays, besides the hegemonic media, we also have access to BBC News or El País, other international news as well. So this is changing the panorama of information, and if the popularization of new media has changed the mediascape, there is also changes in the pattern of consumption of media. So, but this, of course, this is very unequal. This does not mean that everybody has access to the internet. Okay, so we have a great part of the population which the internet is only the smartphone and probably Facebook, okay, and WhatsApp, which is another thing. So I'll try to show a little bit about those 2 campaigns. One is called Chega de Fio, no more catcalling. So this is Juliana de Faria, the campaigner, stating, although my first experience with harassment happened in childhood, I was only able to talk about it 16 years later, at the age of 27, when I saw for the first time in my life a friend complaining in a Facebook post about sexual harassment in public space. Then I had the strength to turn that experience into words. I decided that I would not go back to a place of silence and fear. So in 2013, triggered by a friend's post on Facebook, journalist Juliana de Faria founded a non-profit organization called Think Olga in the city of São Paulo. Initially, Think Olga was just a website and a series of posts on Facebook, and defined itself as a feminist non-profit organization founded with the objective of empowering women through information. A content hub dealing with important subjects for female public and in an accessible manner. The site, with a female personal name, Olga, states that information is power, and wants to promote the idea that once people think, one realizes how sexist the world we live in is. However, women need information about that. Think Olga works to fight sexism and social inequalities, bringing information to women and girls. Since 2013, many materials like this were shown in social media. So they started spreading such images and such little stories. Do you think that calling a woman hot on the street is a compliment? Your mother doesn't think so. So they are little, ideas. They are supposed to be a little funny or nice, but they are trying to express that something very naturalized, which is catcalling, can be seen as a violence. In the beginning, Juliana and most of the young journalists working at Think Olga were white, upper middle class, graduates from some of the best Brazilian universities in their late 20s or early 30s. Juliana did not even see herself as a feminist when the experience began. In 2012, working for the largest publishing groups in the country, as Abril and Globo, she was a freelance journalist doing jobs for female magazines. As she acknowledged on many public occasions, in feminist roundtables, debates, on seminars, where I met her and where I became much more in contact with her in the last few years, she was trying to sell the idea of sexual harassment as a plot for a story to be written in any of those mainstream magazines, particularly female magazines. But the editors did not consider it an appropriate topic for female readers. When Think Olga posts on our website became more popular among middle-class urban girls and women, and the interactions in social media grew, Juliana became quite a celebrity in those same mainstream magazines that she was trying to push the subject. Then she became the interviewee. Instead of being the journalist, she became the focus. The images from No More Catcalling campaign started circulating. I first saw them in Facebook. But they also launched an interactive map. This is similar to other international campaigns, okay? But I'm trying to... An interactive map where people can tell, oh, I was harassed here or here, starting with the city of São Paulo. Those initiatives were propelled to express both the ordinariness of sexual harassment and its violent and traumatic nature. Therefore, they were using sexual violence and a trauma as a way to promote women's and human rights. They also launched online research for people to tell their stories, and this came, this is not a, let's say, statistically based sample, okay? People were answering this online request as they felt, of course, harassed. So the online research showed that 99% felt they had been harassed, 98% on the street, 80% on public spaces, 77% in bars and clubs, and so on. Data from the research also shows that 83% do not like catcalling, because that's a very traditional argument, saying that women like catcalling because they are being, they are being seen as beautiful or something like that, and they are trying to stress that they not like. When they did the cloud of words that were more common in this research, the word that appeared is fear. So they were trying to show how they felt afraid on the streets, not how they felt, fine about being touched or everything. So the word cloud formed from this word fear is the word most usually mentioned for street wrestling, revealing the affective tone raised by the subject. Many women identified with Juliana's and other stories and posts, and they began also posting their stories on Facebook, on Twitters. But this is not like Me Too. They were not accusing anyone. They were just telling their suffering. Okay? Many women identified and told their situations. The point is, for many years, we had no name for those things and feelings that have substantially affected our lives. Alternatively, the names we used, like catcalling or wolf whistling or street hassling, normalized such scene as a part of every woman's life. This was also a part of a naturalized sense of fear of being in public spaces. Juliana then remarks that for years she was ashamed of her body. Feeling afraid, she avoided the streets and she wore clothes that covered her body. So Think Olga was probably able to produce a kind of a counter-cartography of São Paulo. Okay? And the site they have, the website they have, they started just as a website, also gave definitions of what is sexual harassment, explaining the scenes that could be classified as harassment. In November 2014, they also launched with the Women's Office of Public Defenders, Defensoria Pública. They launched a folder explaining how to use existing criminal categories to make a complaint, a juridical complaint of sexual harassment. For until 2018, there was no such criminal type except in labor situations. So, and also after 2018, they also, this is one of the important images that when Juliana appeared in Global Network, and she came with this she told me the other day that she first said this sentence when I was 11, my body betrayed me, when she was in a round table with me. I didn't know it was the first time, but it really impressed me because she said, I was 11, I was a child, I got my first period, my body changed, and I got so afraid of going out on the street. And she tells a story about her first harassment, how it happened. So it started, my point is that hegemonic media displays better a girl like this. She's a white, upper class, things like that. But of course there are other movements going on. There was the black bloggers, feminist bloggers, there's also, feminists from the outskirts, but they don't have the chance of being in global networks so easily, right? So there's also an issue of class and race to be discussed here. And in 2018, they launched this film. It's on the website, you can watch it, called Chega de Fio-Fio, No More Catcalling. And in this film, it's a documentary, it's much more aware of the situation of black women, trans women also, and all social classes, all colors and everything. But another case was the other story, which was my first harassment. It started with this show called Junior MasterChef, and it gained another scale of visibility. The case was triggered by a TV show broadcast on October 2015 by an open commercial mainstream Brazilian TV network, Rede Bandeirantes. Children were engaged in a cooking competition reality show, and a 12-year-old girl was the object of sexual remarks posted via tweets and Facebook. Those tweets were on the trending topics on the next day, and a page on Facebook was launched, and later deleted, expressing male sex desires for the girl as a kind of a fan club. Besides sexualizing her body and manners, as well as the bodies and manners of other children participating in the show, everybody remembers this girl, this blonde girl, but there was a black boy who was also harassed. Some of those tweets and posts asked if a consensual sex approach could be seen as pedophilia. The age of consent in Brazil is 14, so below 14 could be classified as rape. Once those tweets started, Think Olga reacted again and wrote the first tweet calling other women to speak up about their first harassment experiences. We're not hiding our stories anymore. Who should be ashamed of first harassment are the criminals who have violated us. It was difficult for me to translate this, but I think you can get the meaning of it. Posts and tweets from first harassment started flooding my timeline on Facebook in the following days and my classes at the university as well. For mainstream media, the impact was much higher than No More Catcalling. According to Estado de São Paulo, a mainstream paper, there were 65,000 tweets in 2 days. In 2 months, there were 82 stories published on commercial media. What first drew my attention was the fact that, considering the age of the victims and the acts described, what has been called my first harassment were cases of sexual assaults, or under Brazilian law, cases of rape or attempt of rape. So they are around here 6 and 13 years old, the age of my first harassment. Those tweets express some of the recurrent patterns of the stories. The risk of family relations. The perpetrator is usually a close relative, and the danger of a place that was home or like home. When searching for patterns, we found cases of street hassling and flashing by an unknown man, school bullying, sexual assault or attempted rape by a family member or an acquaintance, sexual assault or attempted rape by a stranger, and even cases of rape by a family member, an acquaintance, or a stranger. Aggressors are of the same age or mainly older, including when we can find this information. Sometimes the information is not clear. Including family members, particularly grandfather, father, stepfather, brother, cousin, uncle, godfather, or someone considered as family. But also schoolmates, neighbors, or friends. In the cases of street hassling, most aggressors are unknown. Think-Log analysis of around 3,000 tweets show most victims' age vary from 6 to 13, as I showed you before, and those cases also seem to match some typical cases known from previous research on sexual violence in Brazil, particularly data from rape services in the public health systems, because only around 10% of the cases are reach the police stations, even having police stations for women. Shame and fear, those are two very important words here. Shame and fear prevented women from telling those stories before, and the majority of perpetrators are men the victims already knew. Relatives, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and boyfriends, I forgot. Some of those accounts slip into other types of gender violence, including rape or attempted rape, showing the difficulty of classifying and defining gender violence. At the same time, revealing how from one category of violence, other types also occur in women's everyday lives. They also show how difficult it is to name and express situations of violence in an explicit manner. I've never told anyone before is the most common sentence of those stories. And beyond the feelings of shame and fear, which are also there. The lack of a category that also expressed those acts as violence, or at least some kind of aggression, was part of the impossibility of talking about it. When those campaigns started, we have to bear in mind that, if other women responded, there were also a backlash reaction. So many men were mocking the campaign and saying that acts classified as harassment are funny. They are only sex. They are only catcalling. They are only a pass. And that those Puritan women are making a fuss about nothing. Particularly, right-wing politicians were mocking all those campaigns and striking back, saying that this is not harassment, it's just sex, they are just compliments, and catcalling make pretty women happy. Those are supposedly natural men's attitudes, and women should like it. Such points of view naturalize the idea, usual in media productions as well, that male sexual drive is uncontrollable, that men are naturally heterosexually aroused by pretty girls, that girls themselves are naturally sexy from an early age. Obviously, that position does not take into account the girl's point of view. They cannot see women as subjects of rights. This way of seeing the world is also being named by the feminist movement as rape culture, also following forms of naming violence in the United States. Pop stars, such as there was a pop star, Roger, was a man from And major and minor celebrities, like one former global telenovela that now is a congressman elected in the Bolsonaro's party, alongside right-wing politicians, reacted and stated publicly and loudly their sexist point of view. So I'm coming to the concluding remarks here. Supported by many other similar campaigns, such as My Abuser Confessor, My Secret Friend, and Not Him, Ele Não, against Bolsonaro's presidential campaign in 2018, Think Olga efforts and its participation in a larger feminist environment on the web were able to promote feminism's visibility and to publicly discuss sexual aggression. In a way, the hashtag campaigns have also worked as a feminist pedagogy, promoting similar feelings of acknowledging types of violence, of perceiving oneself as a victim, and identifying effectively with other women who had similar experiences, therefore promoting a sense of identity. So feminism started being a word that went back to the public scene. Campaigners, whether coming from collectives, NGOs, left political party activists, black activists, or professionals in the field of journalism, were able to push subjects to mainstream media, thus reaching a larger public than the one in certain bubbles, like feminist or leftist web circles. My first harassment campaign was imagining particularities of the 2015 context, named by the hegemonic media as the Brazilian Year of the Women's Spring. It shows the impact on mainstream media of the growing visibility of a feminist discursive field of action for many types of groups and movements, online and offline, acting in the country. There were many street manifestations as well. Many young feminist initiatives, collectives in schools and universities, particularly here at USP as well, campaigns, blogs and sites, but also street manifestations took place. New social media were part of the movement promoting narratives and identifications. Although from mainstream media it was easily to portray young white girls like Juliana, they also kind of emphasize the criminal discourse. Oh, men with that are pedophilia, you know, this is pedophilia, this is a crime. Although the movement was trying to show that the aim of the movement was not to criminalize, but to show how ordinary it is. However, another expected outcome was the law. I told you already, let me skip that. But the law was, you know, under a chapter called Sexual Dignity, which established also, updated also the rape definition that now includes the categories of sexual importuning, collective rape, and corrective rape against lesbians. The law is particularly addressing the main dramatic cases shown on commercial mainstream media, cases of brutal rapes or sexual harassment in public transportation that were the headlines of main daily newspapers in the previous years. Such changes are now very well explained in the Think Olga website and have reached other colleagues in this field. Feminist lawyers, attorneys are providing new explanations that should help victims have access to justice. Nevertheless, there is an enormous gap in what the law states and how laws are used. In Brazil, it is very rare to convict someone for rape, even when there is proof of violence. People do not feel safe to tell the police, and even fewer trust the juridical system. The scale of incarcerating of black and poor people is also another question related to such a juridical response. Because if anyone is punished, it will certainly not be the upper-class white boys who harass his housemaid that works for his family. Besides the internet movement, massive feminist street manifestations were to happen from 2016 on, even larger ones than those in 2015 that the media likes, particularly in 2018, tagged as Ele Não, Not Him, targeted against the candidate who eventually won the elections, an open misogynist. Reacting to this and other gains, in the feminist movement, the election of a right-wing and anti-women's rights and anti-gender president, pro-torture and admirer of dictators, also showed that gains in human and sexual rights are still at risk. The now president has stated publicly many types of symbolic aggression against women, LGBT groups, and blacks. Once shouting at a left-wing congressman, member of the Workers' Party, "You are so ugly, you don't even deserve to be raped." I end with this commentary. Thank you.
Heloísa, thank you so much for such a thorough, insightful presentation, which I'm sure is going to propose me questions throughout these 2.5 days. My role here is to offer very preliminary comments, and what I chose to do, not being a feminist scholar, is to fall back on my comfort zone, right, and try to rescue the theme of Transatlantic Crises of Democracies. Yes. Also in the hopes of sowing some seeds for the discussion that is going to follow. My comments are also slightly informed by a course that I taught with a colleague this semester on populism, where we touched on what some authors call a contestation of the international legal order, of which, of course, human rights is an important aspect, and within human rights, women's rights, children's rights. Yes. Of course, we happen to be living under a very peculiar government these times, but part of what I'd like to motivate Heloísa to kind of dig deeper, explore, is how eventually what you observe in your research here has been impacted by this crisis of the international legal order, which precedes the election of President Bolsonaro, it actually precedes Brexit, it precedes the election of Donald Trump, right? So, to my benefit, and I want to imagine to the benefit of the discussion, it would be very interesting to hear your thoughts on that. And I have two other points that I'd like to highlight. You talked about, of course, the rise of social media, right, and how social media is competing with hegemonic media, traditional media outlets, to the extent that I couldn't help but retrieve this thought that stood very firm in my mind of a commentator, a media commentator, talking about how CNN could not help but report on Donald Trump's tweets, right? Of course, they had the choice of not reporting and becoming obsolete for a day or two, or perhaps even worse, right? So the rise of social media has apparently impacted this landscape in a very dramatic way. And I think your presentation here showed us, right, evidence of that, for good and for bad. So, of course, the think tanks are mobilizing social media and are engaging, right, their audiences through social media, including female and male audiences as well, as I can see. But on the other hand, social media has this unanticipated, potentially very adverse impact, and I think some of the cases that you showed me display that. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you on that. Like, if you brought three markers in the case of Brazil, I think 2000, 2010, and of course nowadays, right? And on the subject of social media, and very much related to that, it also came out in the presentation, the issue of polarization. Yes. And the scholarship on populism is very much worried about polarization, the consequences of polarization for democratic discourse, yes. And here, I think this phenomenon of polarization has a number of consequences, and I'd love to hear more from you on that, if you can connect the two at some point. So sorry for capturing the time, but we'll make room for questions and comments. As you like, if you want to respond now or perhaps collect some questions and reactions.
Maybe I can start commenting a little bit, and then yes, you're absolutely right that the rise of populism is ahead of the election of Bolsonaro. It came first, but how I feel, well, I was when I started this research. 2014, for instance, we had no ideas how things would develop, and I think the issue here of the feminist movement, it's like they're fighting. They were in the beginning, they were like struggling with what we thought was conservative thought that was here before. What we were facing was Brazilian culture, let's say, which naturalized some types of violence, which naturalized some types of sexual acts as funny, but which some women felt violently victimized by such acts. The point is, I think, that first, people, when she started with Chega de Fio with No More Catcalling, it was like, oh, that's not really important. That's something not very serious. Yeah, it happens, but it doesn't matter. So she was trying to push the idea that it did matter. Okay, she and everybody else. But like this matters. Okay, this is an issue. When with the second campaign, my first harassment, it became more a public issue because children are much more legitimate victims than young women with miniskirts walking on the streets, right? So it had a much more affective appeal, in a way, emotional appeal, which kind of explains why hegemonic media gave much more attention to the second campaign than the first one. But what became clear was that they were not only facing what was before there, but it only became clear after, I think, after 2016, because then it became clear also that a person could public state things so awful as, you are so ugly, you don't even deserve to be raped, So this was probably something that, even if people thought about this, they would not state it publicly. Because, they could disagree with the campaigns, but they would not state publicly, I'm a rapist. Because rape is a taboo word. He was then stating it's fine to be a rapist. So I think there is, there is a kind of, I don't want to say that it's exactly a backlash, because it was always there, but it came with a new force. So many people are discussing how people can, say that it's okay to kill people on the favelas, on the slums, on the shantytowns, because, so people are not ashamed of stating their violent point of view anymore. I think that's the major change I feel in the public arena. People wouldn't say that so clearly as they are stating now, either against women, either against blacks, against LGBT movement. But also this has, in a way, I think, this has also to be, we have also to consider the anti-gender campaigns that many countries are going through, even France, France is the example of, which is supposed to be more human rights things, but there is a strong Catholic movement, anti-gender, and anti-gender theory. In Hungary, they closed the university, right? And Bolsonaro made a list of all the researchers that study genders. I'm probably on that list, I suppose.
The militaries.
No,
and the militaries are outside. No?
Yes.
The police, the cops are there.
Here, yes. And as I stated, we don't feel protected by police in Brazil. Women don't want to go to police stations. Of course they don't. They know they might be humiliated again. They might happen a second type of victimization, which you call institutional violence, can happen in those places. So I think it's also, like the clashes, the struggle is getting worse because of this new force, anti-rights, anti-gender, things like that. On social media, that's a very difficult thing to talk about because we're studying it and we don't know very well. That's why I went to the Department of Communications in the London School of Economics last year, because how I feel is that I was observing here a certain bubble, a feminist bubble. I was not observing the other side, the other bubbles, or the other, what I prefer to call circuits, the other circuits that are working there. So, but some of those, the point is that some of those get more visibility and legitimacy when they arrive in hegemonic media, in a way. And but of course we have an issue of how news are spread and all the things of this fake news and everything. But I think in Brazil we also have a feeling that we always dealt with fake news. I mean, Globo also spread fake news, it supported dictatorship, In a way, I think many countries, we also faced fake news before, but of course, in social media, they have a chance of spreading in a way which is uncontrollable and which also gives visibility to absurds, unimaginable, like in Bolsonaro's campaign, the idea of the baby bottle with the pennies, I don't know, on the point, which was an absurd, fake thing, but it helped elect Bolsonaro. So, and I think like major hegemonic media should be more aware of not just showing that, not just showing Trump's campaign, Trump's tweets, but also trying to be more pedagogical in a way, didactic in a way about what is real, what is not, which is also very difficult. Brazil, particularly in Brazil, I think the thing with more people have access to the internet, but of course this access is very unequal in terms of social class and in terms of regions. If you live in rural areas, for instance, is different. But also in terms of ages, because youngsters know better how to use this technology. I'm often asking my daughter to help me with something here. So they have more how to deal with this. But they are also, in a way, less prepared, less informed about many of those things. So I think it's very, very difficult to see how to tackle this, because I don't believe, as I showed, I don't believe the pure announcing of laws, of new laws will solve. It's okay to have a new law, but is this the real answer for it? So I don't think, I think of course the spread of fake news has much to do with the polarization that you were asking, but particularly in Brazil, I think the polarization has also been able to reveal the violence that can come from the right wing, because it has shown many. I mean, we are every day having news of how police is killing more and more, and they are supported by those people in a way. So they kind of are allowed more to do that. So that's how I think. I don't know. I don't think I have an answer, but maybe.
So this is a comment rather than. I think, if you remove thank you for an excellent thought-provoking paper. It's not just this paper, but what we take on to reflect on our own situations. And I think if I want to remove name of Brazil and replace it by India, everything is almost like a mirror image. So that's one. And second thing that I wanted to say was perhaps what she was also referring to. So, of course, family-based violence was something that we've always had. And it is to do with, again, a kind of assertion of power, I think. And so now it has become a do or die of show of power in this current regimes all over the world, I think. And I feel that, for a show of power, all regimes around the world is showcasing war and power displays of different kinds, and also controls related to the idea of threat. So constantly kind of using threat as something
Threat,
that,
okay,
yes.
yes.
And so I think it's finally related to the word subjugation.
Mm-hmm.
The whole idea that some people have to be subjugated in order for the others to have a say. And that to make it public, to kind of a performative presence of subjugation.
Yes.
And I think, which is why it's played out on figure of women, figure of most economically and socially weak, and the vulnerable. So this is why I think this whole visibility of rape culture is something that is gaining, and lynching and rape culture. These are things of subjugation, of power display.
Fantastic, yes.
I think.
Should I comment on this?
Can I just add something?
Yes.
I totally go along with what Mala is saying about the mirror image part, and it was particularly the social honor, because so much of killings, etc., of sexual violence, sometimes even carried out from within the families in a way to sort of, shock, or, there is a way of sort of subjugation that it's involved there. My question was about the social media really, in the sense that when the right wing is so clearly far ahead in exploiting social media, so where do we go from there? That's what I always was. Sometimes I feel like my question to you is, do we go back to smaller, more local forms of protest, which we are more familiar with as women, as exploited groups, where these dangers of this kind of, where we can sort of deal with it better, at the picket, at the factory gate, in the homes. So do we go back, or are there ways in which we can work this better? So I just wondered whether you had any thoughts about that. Because it's a big dilemma.
Yes. I think that comparison with India would be great, because when I was studying television also, I had this feeling that we had much to compare with India. Brazil and India, we have many things to exchange, I think, and see similar things, and similar and different things, but of course, comparing is also showing differences. But how I feel is that the social media has kind of ignited all kinds of movements, of social movements, left-wing and right-wing. The thing with the feminist, I'll talk about the feminists, not about left-wing in general, but the feminists tend to be more left-wing, of course, but how I feel is that, in a way, social media has helped make many of those manifestations. We had pop-up manifestations, suddenly pop up by some events, like the killing of Marielle Franco, the counselor woman who was killed last year in Rio. When she was killed, there was a pop-up manifestation at Avenida Paulista, which was the saddest manifestation I've ever seen in my life. I've been in most of them, so of course I was studying, but because there were no sound equipment or anything, because it was not prepared to be a manifestation. It was sudden. It closed the streets, and everybody was quiet. There was no chanting. There was no shouting, and it was really, really a quiet, black and feminist manifestation, and not only social media, but alternative channels like Media Ninja or free journalists and things like that. They were also spreading those images of, street manifestations. And this had a double edge, because in a way it helped to improve the manifestation, it helped to show the manifestations existed, particularly when the papers on the next day never mentioned the manifestations. They were really invisible to hegemonic media at that time, There was no helicopter filming from above, as it didn't exist. But on the other side, they put images that helped police go after the manifestators also. So the images also kind of turned the manifestations more vulnerable at the same time. Particularly some of the leaders and things like that, they became more vulnerable at the same time. So we even when we are trying to see what's the good of it, we see that there are outcomes that we didn't imagine, So particularly for people that study social movements in Brazil, they were telling me this idea. Have you realized how much vulnerable also this spread of news turns some people into vulnerable, targets for the police or whatever. But I think also that the difference is from maybe, but I'm not sure. We have now people who are studying, we have now some students, postgraduate students studying the right-wing online movements also, so I didn't see the results yet. But the thing we feel is that the online thing helped create this feeling of, as I said, I think a kind of a pedagogy of feminism, people finding out they are feminists, who are men and women. There were men that were supportive, a lot of men that were supportive to the campaign also, and things like that. But the true encounter on the streets, on the manifestation, is also important for this feeling. Without this, it skips more quickly. But how I think also is that during this period, we had also the growth of what they called feminist collectives. They are social groups, social movements, here at the university, at schools, even at primary schools now. They have feminist collectives. Not everywhere. I'm talking most about São Paulo and larger cities probably, but the thing is, we did not imagine that would come so, also in a very local way at the same time, at schools and at the universities and the discussion. But it is also very difficult to tackle the subjects because this is very natural. And I'm not sure the right-wing groups have the face-to-face interaction as well, as much as we have now. I'm not sure. We have to find out.
Both Urmi and Sucheta have talked about the Indian situation. My feeling is that in India what tends to happen is that sometimes there are these very awful cases which actually result in a popular upsurge of feeling against this kind of sexism. So for instance, you might have heard of the Nirbhaya case as led to a huge spontaneous protest. People came out and they demanded justice. This was a particularly brutal example of a young woman who was actually brutally raped and then killed. I mean, she was injured very badly. She never survived. So this resulted in a kind of upsurge, and there was a demand for very, very stringent action. The demand was that the trial should take place quickly and these people should be hung. They're still appealing against that judgment. That hasn't happened as yet. More recently, there was a young woman who was raped and killed at a toll barrier in Andhra Pradesh, and this has again resulted in a kind of popular upsurge in the media. So what tends to happen is that, and the right-wing people are basically saying, let's lynch these guys. This is what is happening. So there is this protest, there is this anger, and then it results in quick action. Let's do this. But I think it does not address the basic problem. So we have quick fixes and we say, okay, well, this happened, we must do something about it. But the larger issue is one of ideology and patriarchy. And unless we address that, I'm afraid we are not going to go very far.
I absolutely agree with you. The tendency is to say, oh, those are criminal, let's kill them, let's attack them. Someone also said they should be castrated or something like that. When we know that sexual violence is about power, it's not about sex exactly, because there are many stories of men who are who attacks without their penis, so they don't need, to be sexually aroused to sexually attack someone also. And the thing is that also it can turn to a very conservative, those campaigns, they can turn to a very conservative thing also, like saying, oh, sex is bad. They could say that too. Instead of turning it to an issue of sexual rights, you can turn this to a very conservative issue. Like saying women shouldn't go out to the streets. You can turn to the opposite thing. They are to blame. They should be respectful. In Brazilian law, there was until the change of the rape law, there was the category of decent woman. So rape was only stated if the woman was a decent woman. That means either she was a virgin or a married, respectful woman. So, and this, of course, it changed in law, but as you said, it does not change minds quickly. It does not change a way of thinking. So how I feel is that when they were trying to spread this kind of images, they were like, the pictures, she was like trying to turn into a very didactic, and almost childlike campaign, to be very nice. But it's, we work with education, how difficult it is to change cultures, Of course, education is a point. Right? How we change this at schools, how we change this at the universities and things like that.
Yeah, just make a remark about this woman the other day. And I think that women who do suffer sexual abuse and don't go public is because they cannot afford to do so. And a couple of years ago, the winner of the Maria da Penha Prize was a former model who processed a husband or boyfriend, I don't know which was who, and she won a fortune in processing him. But why she and not the others because she had the means. She was known by the public. She was known by the media. She was a very important model in her youth, and people still remember her. So there must be some.
But it was a civil process, not a penal process like this. It was not a,
Yeah,
not
so
go to jail.
I do think that the women who go public are the ones who really can afford that. Either because they are known or because they have the financial means to do so. But those who suffer sexual abuse by husbands or even parents, they keep quiet. They cannot afford to go there because, especially because they have the fear of being killed by the person even in the family who raped them. So I think that you have to be very careful who receives this kind of prize. You know, because most of the times many women want to show off. Okay? So it's a very sensitive issue.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd like to thank you for your presentation here. I think it was really informing. I had the opportunity to be in Dubrovnik for the summer school that is now promoting this event, and a lot of times issues of gender came up in the conversation, so it's very refreshing to have a talk specifically about that opening this event, and I think I can speak for a lot of the people who are here and were also there. As someone who comes from the literature and language department, I think that there's something very meaningful about your talk related to naming violence and naming different forms of violence, because a lot of times these victims don't even realize that they are going through a process or a dynamics of power that results in violence, because there are many forms of violence.
Yes, of course.
And that brings me to my first question, which is related to also different power dynamics, and in a more specific case, sexual harassment cases on campus and in the universities. Because we've known cases among students, we've known cases between students and professors, advisors. Recently, I think in the news there was a professor at a federal university that was fired because of a case, and it feels that this conversation is growing, but it's still a very sensitive and very complicated issue, and most of the times higher administration is not necessarily involved or willing to be involved in such cases. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about these cases and what you know of and what's being done about that.
Okay, let me say something, you can answer, and then we have some coffee and come back, because I know we are running a bit late on Fabio has struggled.
Yes, okay. I think there's one more
Yes,
question. Maybe I could put those you two together and then.
together.
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. Thanks for a really interesting paper. And I suppose my comment is just it's quite general, because what I'm struck by in the situation that you've outlined in recent years here is this discrepancy between, on the one hand, a real progressive steps being taken in the name of liberal democracy that have actually made changes in the law, which is really magnificent. But the fragility of those gestures towards democracy is also very underscored in your paper, and how there's such a contrast between that level and the prevalence of ideologies, mentalities, emotions, financial realities, and then also I think perhaps groups of people who are still excluded from discourse, or who don't have access to the power of language, because you need language to go up against the patriarchy.
Yes.
You really do, to speak out as a victim of a sexual crime.
Yes, I think I'll try to discuss quickly. I think the issue of suing the aggressors is more complicated than just having the money, because we have women police stations, but when a girl or a woman goes talking about like rape, it's very common that even a women police officer tell me, but you were on the street with this miniskirts. What did you mention? That's something different from that. So the thing is, the law does not really works in itself, you know, without other things. Right? And it's very complicated to discuss issues of domestic violence and sexual violence within the family. There are many factors. There are factors of, you know, having the economic issues, but also there are many other things besides this. And also there is the thing that you cannot trust the police. You cannot trust the juridical system. We had a very fancy case, bad word, a very dramatic case in this university at the School of Medicine. And in fact, the aggressor was not convicted on the second stage of the, but even that, you know, the girl was, it was not so violent as the Indian cases that took the news, but it was a kind of, you know, dramatic case. And in my opinion, I'm going to publish this in French. I'm not sure I can publish this in Portuguese yet. And in my opinion, the university, sexual violence has to do with power, of course, as you said, you've all said, also. And it's very difficult to discuss this here at the university as well. We have been trying, I mean me and some professors, we have a feminist group called Rede Não Cala, network, Speak Up, something like that. What we feel is that we have been demanding so many things from the university. We have made a plan of a special, like you know, a gender office or something like that. They have made the office of USP Women on the support of UN Women, but it did not really tackle the issue. You know, it did not really face the issue of having like a place for attending those people, you know, with psychologists, we have of course the medical for rape services, but we had no place where a student could complain about, you know, sexual harassment from a professor. We have no system to deal with that reality here. And most of the time, when we are trying to expose those cases and to tell about the stories, and we did not mention the name of particular professors or particular aggressors, because we're afraid of being sued also, without, you know. But people were like coming to me and saying, "Are you crazy? Why are you talking about this? You're going to ruin your life. You know, you should not talk. These are not talkable things." Again, so it's again a matter of how much can you speak up, what can be said also, and what cannot be said, you know. So some of those cases in Brazil, the cases of rape between students, gained a little visibility, less, but also nowadays some cases in the federal universities. Unicamp has a new office to attend those victims. Very many universities have done that. But we need also a place to attend, to have a place to talk those stories, but we need also new rules. There's no rule about sexual harassment in this university, for instance, you know, stating like, you know, and we have cases in all unities, I don't know how many we have. We're trying now to collect more and to build a document about this. But as it's very local, and one stories here, because I was a professor of gender theory, then some students came to my room and started telling their stories. That's how I started studying this, because I was not studying sexual violence. It was not an issue for me. I was studying media and gender and the building of, you know, white beauty and things like that. But then it really struck me how, because that's it. One point is that domestic violence and sexual violence, they happen in all social classes. There is an image that it happens to the poor people. That's a problem of the poor, which is, of course, a prejudice, another type of prejudice. And it's still very difficult to talk about. We still have, of course, if you go and talk to the administrators, or we have a case of sexual harassment, he will probably say, oh, that's very grave, let's try and do something. But if you try to, oh, we need this, oh no, we don't want to have this now, So when we try to make plans to really face the issue, that really, are policies that should be done, in terms of talking about it, in terms of having a place to be attended, in terms of having procedures inside of the university to investigate if it really happened or not. It should be, something like that. We do not have, at speak now, at the moment, we do not have this. Some universities are doing this. Federal do Paraná, Paraná State University, Federal University, Unicamp, State University of Campinas, Goiás, Federal University of Goiás. There are some universities that are trying to tackle it, and those have particularly, some cases of professors that were expelled from the universities. A few, but the whole idea is not just to be punishing people. Is to show that this should change, So I think but of course, building cultural change is very difficult. I think I'm going too long, I'm afraid.
Okay.
So thank you very much.
Thank you.